Hands up. I'm a physician. I work in that hospital. You match a description. Face forward. My badge is on my left lapel. Please look at it. I see it. You're coming with me. My patient inside is dying. I was just paged. Not my problem. Turn around. One phone call. The hospital is right there. I said turn around.
Kofi Acheampong was raised in this city by a Ghanaian immigrant father who worked as a pharmacist and a mother who was a registered nurse. A household where medicine was a framework for paying attention to people that preceded any formal training. His father dispensed medication to the same patients for decades and knew their names and their histories. His mother worked night shifts for 26 years and came home in the mornings and did not complain. Kofi absorbed both of them before he left for Morehouse College at 18. He completed his undergraduate degree in biochemistry, his medical degree at Howard University, and his surgical residency at 31. He joined St. Augustine at 32 because the hospital serves a patient population that includes a significant proportion of underinsured and uninsured individuals in the surrounding neighborhood, and because he believed, and has continued to believe across 12 years, that the quality of care a person receives should not be determined by the thickness of their insurance file. He is the senior attending on call on the evening of October 14th, because his rotation exists to ensure that the most experienced available surgeon is reachable within minutes when a case like Thomas Osei's arrives. He has told the story of the parking structure detention in a specific and consistent way across every retelling. He showed the badge. He stated the emergency. He said the patient's name. He asked the officer to make a phone call that would have taken less than 2 minutes. The officer told him to turn around. He does not editorialize because the security camera footage, the pager log, the arrest report, and the operating room timeline say everything that needs to be said with more precision than editorializing allows. The patient's name is Thomas Osei. The time of death is 8:47 p.m. The distance from the point of arrest to the operating room is 140 feet. He was released at 8:53 p.m. He arrived at 9:04 p.m. He was 6 minutes too late. Thomas Osei taught history at Delmore Avenue Secondary School for 29 years. He coached track for 23 of them, with the specific energy of a person who genuinely believed that understanding where you came from changes what you are able to do with where you are going. His former students, many of them now in their 30s and 40s, will tell you that he meant it, that he was not performing belief but living it, in the classroom and on the track, and in the Tuesday afternoon conversations he had with students who needed someone to talk to and found him reliably available. He retired at 58 and spent the following 3 years doing approximately the same things he had always done. He presented at St. Augustine's emergency department on a Wednesday evening with chest pain he had been managing for 2 hours because he did not want to make a fuss. The imaging confirmed what the pain had been saying. The page went to Dr. Acheampong at 7:14 p.m. Thomas Osei did not know that the surgeon paged for his case was 140 feet away in the parking structure. He did not know at 7:19 p.m. when the handcuffs went on. He did not know at 8:47 p.m. The record knows. The distance is 140 feet, and it is in the record, and it is permanent. Craig Benton is 33 years old, 6 years on the force, 2 prior complaints involving confrontational language during stops, both resolved with informal counseling. He works the hospital district corridor and has worked it for 3 of his 6 years. Familiar with the parking structure, with the steady movement of medical personnel in identification badges and scrubs, with the pagers. He has been familiar with all of it for 3 years. The description he was working from had 3 matching characteristics. Black male, approximately 6 feet, dark jacket, no specific facial description, no height range narrower than one that applies to a significant portion of the adult male population. Nothing that would have distinguished the subject from a senior attending physician wearing a hospital identification badge and carrying an active pager, walking toward a hospital at the time of the stop. He saw the badge at 7:17 p.m. The security camera records him looking at it for 2 seconds at 4 feet in adequate overhead lighting. He heard the pager activate at 7:21 p.m. and again at 7:34 p.m. He did not contact the hospital. He did not ask the patient's name. The arrest report he filed at 7:44 p.m. does not mention the badge, the pager, the name Thomas Osei, or the words, "A patient is dying." The security camera footage mentions all four. He is placed on administrative leave the week after the incident, when the hospital's legal department delivers the operating room timeline and the pager log to the watch commander. He reviews the security camera footage in the internal affairs interview. He watches himself looking at the badge for 2 seconds. He does not say anything for a long time. Patricia Hale is 31 years old, second-year surgical resident. She has assisted on 4 aortic procedures and led none before October 14th. She is told the situation at 7:41 p.m., the patient's presentation, the classification, the absence of the senior attending, the decision to proceed, and she scrubs in with the focused discipline of a resident, who understands that the patient on the table does not have the option of waiting for a more experienced surgeon. She performs the procedure for 55 minutes with complete attention and complete commitment. It is not enough. She closes at 8:47 p.m. and stands in the operating room for a long time. She is not named as a defendant. She is not the subject of any complaint. She testifies at trial for 11 minutes. The courtroom does not make a sound for any of it, because she is telling the truth about what it is like to be the person in the room when the person who should have been in the room is 140 feet away in handcuffs, and the truth requires no supplementation. The case lives in 4 documents and 1 distance. Every fact that matters is in the record before Caldwell files the first motion. The parking structure security camera footage captures Benton's vehicle entering at 7:16 p.m., the identification badge visible from the moment of approach. Benton looking at it for 2 seconds at 4 feet at 7:17 p.m. The exchange that follows. The handcuffs at 7:19 p.m. The pager illuminating at 7:21 p.m. while Dr. Acheampong's hands are behind his back and Benton looking at it for 1 second and looking away. The pager activating again at 7:34 p.m. while the arrest report is being written. And the eastern entrance to St. Augustine Medical Center visible at the far end of the level in the background of every frame. 140 feet in every frame for the full duration of the detention. The pager log records 4 activations. 7:14 p.m., the initial emergency page. 7:21 p.m., the first follow-up, activating during the detention, audible on the security camera audio track. 7:33 p.m., the charge nurse's second attempt. 7:34 p.m., a second activation of that page, audible on the footage while Benton writes the arrest report. 4 activations, 2 during the detention, 0 mentioned in the arrest report. The hospital's operating room scheduling system records 26 time-stamped lines. Emergency page generated 7:14 p.m. Senior attending on call identified as Dr. Kofi Acheampong. First phone contact attempt 7:31 p.m. No response. Second page 7:33 p.m. No response confirmed at 7:35 p.m. Decision to proceed 7:41 p.m. Dr. Hale assigned 7:43 p.m. Scrubs in 7:49 p.m. Procedure begins 7:52 p.m. Patient time of death 8:47 p.m. Dr. Acheampong arrives at operating room 9:04 p.m. The jury asks for this document to be reprinted in larger type on day 2 so they can read it at the table without difficulty. They read it multiple times. They count the minutes between entries. The arrest report is 3 pages. Stop at 7:17 p.m. Arrest at 7:19 p.m. Release at 8:53 p.m. Individual matching dispatch description. Subsequent match to another individual. Charges not pursued. No mention of the identification badge. No mention of the pager. No mention of Thomas Osei. No mention of a patient dying. The security camera footage contradicts it on every point it omits. The jury receives all 4 documents on day 2. They have already seen the badge. They have already counted 140 feet. They do not need the contradiction explained. The security camera footage is Exhibit A. The jury watches the full relevant portion on day 1, 7:16 p.m. to 7:34 p.m. They watch the badge. They watch Benton look at it for 2 seconds. They watch Dr. Acheampong's hands raise, and his mouth form the words, and the handcuffs go on. They watch the pager illuminate at 7:21 p.m., and Benton look at it for 1 second and look away. They watch the eastern entrance visible in the background of every frame. The foreperson will later describe the 2-second look as the moment the verdict became inevitable. Not because 2 seconds proved malice, but because 2 seconds, in a frame that also contains a hospital entrance 140 feet away, proved choice. The arrest report is Exhibit B, placed beside the security camera footage on day 2, so the jury can read each omission against the footage that documents what was omitted. The badge, in the footage, absent from the report. The pager, in the footage twice, absent from the report. The words "a patient is dying," in the footage, absent from the report. The name Thomas Osei, stated clearly on camera, absent from the report. The jury reads the report and looks at the footage and reads the report again. The operating room timeline is Exhibit C and the pager log is Exhibit D, presented together on day 3. Caldwell reads them aloud in alternating sequence, a timestamp from the pager log, then its corresponding entry in the operating room timeline, so that the jury hears both documents in conversation. The page at 7:14 p.m. Dr. Acheampong identified as senior attending. The pager activating during the detention at 7:21 p.m. The charge nurse's first contact attempt at 7:31 p.m. No response. The pager again at 7:34 p.m. The decision to proceed at 7:41 p.m. Dr. Hale scrubbing in at 7:49 p.m. Thomas Osei's time of death at 8:47 p.m. Dr. Acheampong released at 8:53 p.m. Arriving at 9:04 p.m. The courtroom is completely still for the full reading. The hospital's chief of surgery testifies on day 4. 14 years as chief. He testifies that type A aortic dissection outcomes are directly and measurably correlated with time to intervention, that Dr. Acheampong's experience level is a material factor in outcome probability, and that the 1 hour and 34-minute gap between the initial page and the beginning of the procedure falls within the window the medical literature identifies as the interval during which surgical delay becomes a primary contributing factor to mortality in cases of this complexity. He says it without qualification and sits down. The courtroom is completely still. Caldwell deposes Benton 5 months after the incident. She asks him to describe what he observed when he approached the individual in the parking structure. He says he observed an individual matching the dispatch description. She asks whether he observed anything identifying on the individual's person. He says he observed an identification badge. She asks what it said. He says St. Augustine Medical Center. She asks whether the individual made any verbal statement about a patient. Benton is quiet for 17 seconds. He says, "He said a patient needed him." She asks whether the word dying was used. He is quiet for 11 seconds. He says, "Yes." She asks whether he contacted the hospital to verify the identification. He says, "No." She asks why not. He does not respond. She places the security camera still from 7:17 p.m. on the table. Benton's face at 4 feet from Dr. Acheampong, the badge on the lapel, the timestamp in the corner, the eastern entrance visible in the background. She asks him to confirm that the badge visible is the badge he observed during the stop. He says, yes. She asks whether the arrest report documents the badge, the pager, or Dr. Acheampong's statement that a patient was dying. He says, no, to all 3. She places the operating room timeline beside the still and asks him to read the entry for 8:47 p.m. He reads, patient time of death, 8:47 p.m. She asks him to read the entry for 9:04 p.m. He reads, Dr. Acheampong arrives at operating room. She asks him to read the release time from his own arrest report. He reads, 8:53 p.m. She places the diagram of the parking structure beside both documents and asks him to read the marked distance between the arrest location and the hospital entrance. He reads, 140 feet. She closes her folder. The 17-second silence from the question about the dying patient is the last thing she plays to the jury in her closing argument. She plays it without narration. She sits down. The civil jury deliberates for 2 days and 4 hours. $31.4 million, unanimous on all counts. $11.2 million to Dr. Kofi Acheampong for wrongful arrest for the documented harm of being detained with a visible hospital identification badge and an active pager while stating that a patient was dying 140 feet away, and for the irreversible consequence of arriving at the operating room at 9:04 p.m. and being told that Thomas Osei died at 8:47 p.m. The jury's written finding notes that the harm is documented by 4 independent documentary sources and 140 feet of undisputed permanent distance. $9.8 million to the estate of Thomas Osei. The jury's written finding stating that the causal chain between the wrongful detention and the patient's death is established by the operating room timeline, the pager log, the security camera footage, and the expert testimony of the chief of surgery, and is not materially disputed by any evidence presented at trial. $10.4 million in punitive damages against the city. The jury's written finding describing the arrest report's complete omission of the badge, the pager activations, and the explicit statement that a patient was dying as a deliberate and documented misrepresentation in the officer's own hand. Not consistent with oversight and not consistent with error. Benton is terminated and convicted on all counts, including obstruction of justice for the arrest report omissions. He is sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. The Acheampong standard is adopted departmentally within 30 days. Mandatory verification of medical credentials within 15 minutes when a subject identifies as an on-call medical professional, with required hospital contact, required supervisor notification, and required documentation of all identifying information presented during the stop. Adopted statewide within 8 months and in 21 states within 16 months. Thomas Osei's name is in the legislative history of every state that adopted it, because Caldwell made sure of that, so that the 2 names are in the same document in 21 states and will remain there after every other consequence has been resolved. The distance between the point on the second level of the parking structure where the handcuffs went on at 7:19 p.m. and the eastern entrance to St. Augustine Medical Center is 140 feet. Dr. Acheampong walks it every working day. He walked it at 9:02 p.m. on October 14th and arrived 6 minutes after Thomas Osei died. 140 feet is not a metaphor. It is the length of approximately half a city block. It is the distance a person covers at a normal walking pace in under a minute. It is the distance visible in the background of every frame of the security camera footage from the moment both men are standing on the second level, the eastern entrance over Dr. Acheampong's shoulder, present in every frame for the full duration of the detention. The jury was shown a diagram of the distance on day 1, before the footage, before the documents, before the testimony. They carried it into every subsequent piece of evidence and into the deliberation room and into the written finding, and each of them will carry it for the rest of their lives. Because 140 feet is the kind of measurement that does not leave a person once they understand what it contains. The operating room scheduling system preserves its records for 7 years as required by state medical record retention law. The pager lock, the security camera footage, and the arrest report are in the evidence record permanently as trial exhibits. The Acheampong standard is in the policy manuals of 21 states and in the training materials of every officer hired in those states from the date of adoption forward. Thomas Osei's name is in the legislative history alongside Dr. Acheampong's because Caldwell made sure the standard named the physician and the record named the patient. Dr. Acheampong asked for Thomas Osei's file at 9:04 p.m. in the hallway. He read it that night. He has not spoken publicly about what he read or what he felt reading it, because that is between him and his patient. He shows up to work. He is the senior attending on call when the page comes in, and he is in the operating room when the procedure begins. He has been doing this for 17 years, and the mission does not stop because someone has failed. Thomas Osei deserved the surgeon who was paged for his case. The next Thomas Osei deserves the same. The work of making sure that is what happens falls to the people who are still in the building. He is still in the building. The verdict, the conviction, the standard, the 21 states, the policy manuals. None of it reaches back to 7:19 p.m. when the handcuffs went on, 140 feet from the eastern entrance. None of it reaches the 2 seconds Benton spent looking at the badge and the decision he made after them. None of it reaches the 55 minutes Dr. Hale spent in the operating room, or the long time she stood there afterward. None of it reaches the hallway at 9:04 p.m. The Acheampong standard makes the next stop 15 minutes shorter before it becomes an hour and 41 minutes long. The mandatory hospital contact requirement makes the next badge a 2-minute phone call before it becomes a $9.8 million line in a civil verdict. 21 states, 15 minutes, 2 minutes. The distance is still 140 feet. The standard does not change the distance. It changes what an officer is required to do with it. Thomas Osei's estate received $9.8 million. It is the correct amount for what the record shows, and it is not the correct amount for Thomas Osei, because there is no correct amount for Thomas Osei. He taught history for 29 years and coached track, and showed up and came to the emergency department on a Wednesday evening and deserved the surgeon who was paged for his case at 7:14 p.m. and who was standing 140 feet away. At 7:14 p.m., the emergency page went out, and the senior attending on call turned around and started walking toward the hospital. At 7:17 p.m., Officer Benton looked at a hospital identification badge for 2 seconds and heard the words, "A patient is dying." At 7:19 p.m., the handcuffs went on. The hospital was in the background of the frame. At 7:21 p.m., the pager activated while the surgeon's hands were behind his back. At 7:34 p.m., it activated again while the arrest report was being written, and the officer did not look up. At 7:41 p.m., the hospital decided to proceed without the surgeon 140 feet away. At 7:49 p.m., a second-year resident scrubbed in. At 8:47 p.m., Thomas Osei died. At 8:53 p.m., the handcuffs came off. At 9:04 p.m., the surgeon arrived at the operating room. The distance was 140 feet. The phone call would have taken 2 minutes. The badge was on the lapel the entire time. The arrest report does not mention it. So here is my question. If a visible hospital identification badge, an active pager, and the explicit words "a patient is dying" are not sufficient to produce a 2-minute phone call to a hospital 140 feet away, what does that tell us about which credentials this system treats as worth verifying, and which it requires to cost a life before it takes them seriously? Should the Acheampong standard's 15-minute verification window be shortened to 5 minutes for any stop occurring within 500 feet of a medical facility, given that the verification call in this case would have taken under 2 minutes and the hospital entrance was visible in every frame of the footage? And should the deliberate omission of visible credentials and an explicit medical emergency statement from an arrest report be codified as a standalone criminal offense, separate from the underlying wrongful arrest, so that the decision to leave them out of the record carries its own sentence? Share your thoughts in the comments. This story is not about one officer who did not make a phone call. It is about an officer who looked at a hospital identification badge for 2 seconds and heard the words "a patient is dying" and made a decision, and about what that decision cost in a room 55 minutes long at the end of 140 feet. It is about a pager that activated 4 times during a detention and an arrest report that mentioned it 0 times. It is about Dr. Patricia Hale standing in an operating room for a long time, and Dr. Kofi Acheampong standing in a hallway for a long time, and Thomas Osei, who taught history for 29 years and coached track, and showed up and came to the emergency department on a Wednesday evening and deserved the surgeon who was paged for his case. The page went out at 7:14 p.m. The badge was on the lapel. The pager was on the hip. The hospital was 140 feet away and visible in every frame. Thomas Osei deserved those 2 minutes. The badge said so. The pager said so. Dr. Acheampong said so at 7:17 p.m. with his hands raised, 140 feet from the door. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next story.